Philadelphia's presentation of the Green Party convention in Denver. For the next hour, you'll see some of the events that happened at the convention. You'll hear from some of the people who spoke. Have a good time.
Thank you, everyone. I want to just begin this with a couple of acknowledgments. My first acknowledgement is to my mother, who's back in the Midwest watching this on TV and who's going to join me in California in a couple of weeks, and to my father, who's watching this up in heaven, for the two people who gave me the love and support to be able to follow my dreams and intuitions, and that's helped me be where I am today, and I love them, and thank you very much. The second thing I want to do is acknowledge the other office holders, in addition to Gail and Elizabeth and Julie and myself, who haven't been up to speak but are here in attendance, because they're awesome too. Echnaton Vetter from the Common Council in Madison, Wisconsin. Brian Laverty from the Borough Council of Blossburg, Pennsylvania, and Katie Schei from Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. They're both here. Gary Klaus, City Council, Silver City, New Mexico. Annie Young and Dean Zimmerman, Rec and Parks Board, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Paul Kelly, City Council, Little Rock, Arkansas. Here in Colorado, Art Goodtimes from the County Commissioner of San Miguel County, and Krista Paradise. Krista Paradise, Board of Trustees, Carbondale, Colorado. And finally, my good friend and colleague on the Santa Monica City Council, Kevin McEwen. We're a cross-section of this country, and we're making it happen. Why do we run as Greens? We run because we have a vision of how the world can be, where it can be fair and just and sustainable, and people who are affected by decisions of their government have a direct say in it, and we can hold that vision for the long term while being part of the system and making slow incremental change and sometimes quantum leaps like the Green Party has made this year. How has that vision come about in my city? I live in beautiful Santa Monica, California. We're surrounded on three sides by the megalith of Los Angeles and on the west by the ocean. We're the densest city in Southern California along the coast, and there's incredible development pressure. So what do we do as Greens? Affordable housing. Ensure that people have a place to live that they can afford, to preserve the economic diversity and social diversity of our community so that we don't get sold to the highest bidder, and so we can preserve community. And this past year, we have dedicated $25 million to purchase and rehabilitate affordable housing and build new affordable housing in our community. For our single-family homes, there's incredible pressure to develop there. We're not telling people that they can't build their homes, but what we're saying is the type of homes you build have to fit into your neighborhood. So we've modified our development standards so people don't build big boxes, one butted up against the other, but that we preserve open space in our neighborhood, a chance for people to meet and reflect and share community with each other. The sense of the commons, not only our private space, but our public space, that which binds us. We have one of the most progressive street performer ordinances, for example, on our 3rd Street Promenade to enliven that social space. In our parks, in open space. Kevin and I and others have been particularly aggressive there. A couple of years ago, my start in politics in Santa Monica was opposing a massive commercial office park that our city council approved in 1993. In 1994, we got the signatures to force it onto the ballot for a public vote, but then the developer spent $250,000 to squash the residents and kept that project approved. But what happens? Grassroots movement sends forward grassroots activists, gets elected, and this past year, we bought that land for $53 million, and now instead of an office park next to the beach, it's going to be affordable housing and parks and open space for our community. Go we go. Instead of just trying to have a more car-dependent culture, we emphasize not just mobility, but accessibility. Land use patterns that make it easier to use your bike and your skates and to walk and to use public transportation. And we have a #1 rated small bus company, the Big Blue Bus in Santa Monica, and more of our vehicles are electric and natural gas. We're making that shift too. We are passing green building guidelines so that all our buildings become more sustainable. We have a cutting-edge sustainable cities program. We're going to be one of the most solar cities on this planet. We're moving further and further along those goals, and everyone in our community has buy-in to that because it's the right thing to do. In terms of keeping means and ends together, because that's what sustainability is about. We divested from tobacco and from nuclear power with our city investments. And we are pursuing what will be a groundbreaking living wage ordinance in this country that will go beyond simply a city contractor style to cover 85% at least of our low-wage workers in our city, because we don't believe that profit's okay, but it should not be based on exploiting people and planet. People have a right to earn enough to live. And in terms of democracy, what do we bring as Greens? The first independent item that I brought to our city council was bring the budget to the people. What we did is I brought an item and our council gave direction to our finance director to go to the farmers markets with the city budget and table at the farmers markets and bring it to everybody and allow people to come and check it out and bring it to where they are so the government becomes theirs. We've followed up with another idea that Kevin and I have worked on, where now anybody with an email address can sign up on a menu from City Hall and have notices and information about everything their government's doing come directly to them without any effort. On the electoral level, I pushed for and we have received more free TV time for candidates so that running for office doesn't require big bucks, but it be inclusive of all the diversity in our society. And now we have moved to also direct our city staff to look at implementation of instant runoff voting and proportional representation in our municipal elections. Because as Greens, we know that the wisdom that is inherent in the diversity of us as a culture in this wonderfully diverse country and this wonderfully diverse planet only will happen when we have political, social, and economic systems that honor that diversity and let it mix and match and all come to the table. Now, does this vision work in this country? The number of elected Greens has been increasing every electoral cycle. In 1996, we had 43 in 13 states. In 1998, we had 63 in 15 states. Now, before even the 2000 elections, we're up to 79 in 19 states. It's growing. Not only are the number of Greens growing, the ethnic diversity of our members is growing, the age diversity. Just this past election, we elected Josh Glastetter in Ithaca, New York from Cornell University, 20 years old now, the youngest Green in office in the country. What this is doing by us winning in more and more, and we're not just winning in what might call liberal to progressive cities, our approach to development, to justice, to inclusivity is having us win in all kinds of cities around the country. As a party that is successfully breaking through in this country with our Neanderthal winner-take-all electoral system that the rest of the world laughs at, just like they laugh at us for having the death penalty, to try and advance in this kind of system while we're waiting to change to proportional representation, and while we run high-profile, quality candidates like Ralph Nader, Winona LaDuke, and the host of wonderful people in your states, and the more that will come in future years because all of you at home are seeing this and need to come forward and run as Greens. Our local-based strategy gives us experience of running on a level where we can successfully communicate our message without the big bucks of TV ads and expensive mailers, where we can go door to door and talk as real people and show that the Green agenda is one of common sense. And that is a strategy where the experience of running and winning and showing that we can govern. 33 out of our 36 Greens who have run for re-election have been re-elected. People not only feel that we have a vision, but that we can implement it. That is the reality that we're here today to celebrate. And with you all, I thank you for your energy. Let's go forward and help us make a more green, fair, just planet. Thank you very much.
Gracias a Annie Geck y a todos los verdes. Thanks to Annie. Quiero dar un saludo a todos los hispanos que nos están viendo, a todos los hispanos verdes que nos están viendo actualmente y que se encuentran aquí presentes. I just said I want to greet all the Hispanic Greens that live in the USA. Y les digo que el movimiento verde es un movimiento mundial, es un movimiento que está en todo el mundo y que en Estados Unidos va a ser muy fuerte y necesita la participación de todos ustedes hispanos que pueden hacer un cambio en este país. Well, first of all, we want to give our support. The Mexican Green Party wants to give the support to the candidacy of Ralph Nader and Winona LaDuke. We want to tell you that the Green Movement is a worldwide movement that is growing fast with strong principles, and you really stand a chance here in the USA. In our case, the Mexican case, we've been a Green Party around 10 years. We have representation in the Congress, both in the lower and the upper chamber. Last legislature, we had around 30 green initiatives that we pushed forward. Around 7 or 8 passed. That's a great start for us. We've been also active in state legislatures and all around the country, pushing green principles forward. We also wanted to tell you that we Greens need to think in the principle of cooperation, in the principles of negotiation, but never corrupting ourselves, never losing our ideology, our identity, but we really need to cooperate with other actors and able to push our ideology forward. I'm going to talk also in Mexico. Maybe that's an experience that we have had. We're right now in an elections. The 2nd of July, we're going to have elections. And the Green Party has an alliance with the National Action Party. This alliance is called the Alliance for Change. And our presidential candidate is Vicente Fox. And I'm going to tell you why we did this alliance, why we chose Vicente Fox. Vicente Fox represents more than a party. Vicente Fox represents a vision, a lot of people, whole organizations. The Green Party made a platform, a joint platform with National Action Party, and in this platform our environmental principles are represented. That's a great achievement. Also, at the beginning in Mexico, we wanted to do a whole opposition alliance, but this was not possible. We had some disagreements within other presidential candidates, but now we have a very strong alliance with a lot of parties, with our candidate of President Fox. And now Vicente Fox is up in the polls, and this is very good for us because for the first time in 70 years, we're gonna just take the PRI down. The PRI is the official party. And obviously we're going to go against all the injustice that exists in our country, against all the corruption that has existed for many years. And I think Fox is going to achieve this. Also, we want to solve the Chiapas problems. Our candidate, Vicente Fox, is against the militarization of Chiapas. We want the military out of Chiapas. We want the fulfillment of the San Andres Accord, and we really want to negotiate with the Zapatista army in favor of the indigenous people. Finally, I want to tell you that the Greens, we're a generation of change. We're a new generation, and we have to change. When something is not good, we have to change. In Mexico, the PRI is not good, and we're going to change it. If things are not good here, we have to change it. We have to stop the contamination of rivers. We have to open spaces for indigenous people. We have to stop destroying our woods, our jungles, and we have to base our principles in love, in justice, and in liberty. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Gail Dixon. She is on the school board in District of Columbia. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you. I said I wasn't going to become maudlin and emotional, but these welcomes that I've gotten along with my colleagues from Washington have been phenomenal, and I thank you for that so very much. And that gets me started, as people have asked me, why are you with the Green Party? Why are you with all those white people? I mean, truth is light. We're here about truth, aren't we? Okay. And I'm being honest here because I have found people in my town who think just like I do. They act pretty much like I do. And they believe that as human beings and citizens of this so-called democracy, we deserve what everyone else takes for granted. Little things, like a vote in Congress. Not to have to pay taxes. We will pay our fair share. We are United States citizens. Although Congress, in its infinite, I cannot use the word wisdom, determines our fate. Every single vote that the citizens make in Washington, D.C. can be snatched away for no good reason because someone from Georgia decides that a small constituency in his home state doesn't like it. So you have an election, you have a vote, and you're told it can't be counted. If I came to Omaha and told you, you will pay double your taxes, but you cannot vote any longer because we don't like what you did, or the person you elected, would I come out of Omaha alive? I don't think so. And that is the bottom line for the DC Statehood Party, and I salute each and every member of what was the DC Statehood Party. I send a special, special look heavenward to people like Julius Hobson, Josephine Butler. I send a special hello to Hilda and Charlie Mason, to Sam Smith, to Ann and Fred Hewitt. The list goes on and on and on of freedom fighters in Washington. I want you to understand this. This is not new. The situation in Washington has been going on since 1790. There is a history that historians know, but between Congress, who could go out and tell that history in 2 minutes to their constituents to better inform them, but of course will never do so because they have a playground in Washington, and the media generally, not the cameramen, but the folk who make decisions have decided that it's in their best interest to make sure that if any news gets out about Washington, D.C., it's going to be bad. And from the beginning of this place called Washington, D.C., there has been this tug of war between power brokers. This goes all the way back to the day of President Adams. And I'm just going to read this very quickly. President Adams, upon moving to the new Capitol in 1800, piously declared, piously is a key word here because it still goes on, in this city may self-government which adorned the great character whose name it bears be forever held in veneration. He then proceeded to tell Congress that, quote, it is with you, gentlemen, to consider whether the Congress's constitutional powers over the district shall be immediately exercised. They exercised them and have continued to do so, although there were very short periods of, quote, self-government. We actually had an elected mayor and council way back in the 1800s. The school system, and I am a proud member of the duly elected Board of Education in Washington, D.C., which is under attack even as we speak, with a referendum coming up on Tuesday to change the elected board, 8 members representing 8 wards and 3 at large, to a so-called hybrid board made up of 5 elected and 4 appointed by a mayor who is owned by Marriott and AOL. And we know this even more because for any of you who come to Washington, D.C. right now, bring plenty of cash for car repair. AOL has been a major factor in tearing up the streets of Washington to lay That's it. All over the city. You know how much they paid to do that? Without then having to go back and repair what they have torn up? Oh no, we charged them $35 for a permit. Or I should say, the mayor's office charged them $35. Now we're talking millions of dollars in fees. Millions that could fund the school system alone. And yet we're told that we don't know how to manage. The manager in this case is a mayor who was elected out of fear because of the ugliness that Congress has done to my city for close to 10 years, all because they didn't like the folk who were elected to office. It's a developer's dream. They're salivating every day, except that the one thing they didn't count on was that citizens aren't stupid. They just have to know what's going on. And that leads me very quickly to say that the reason I'm with the Green Party, the DC statehood Green Party in Washington, and the Green Party as a whole, is because I'm putting you on notice that I'm going to keep on you, just like I expect you to stay on us, to keep our promises, to not go off the path of what is right and ethical and equitable. And I do mean that. Just harking very personally to some of the things that shape me. We're shaped first by the people who bring us into the world. And I have a mother and a father who left the sharecropping fields of Alabama in 1932, not knowing where they were going, and ended up in New Jersey and raised 11 children. That's my first teacher and advocate. And then all of the wonderful people that I've met up and down the road. And I want to thank people like Jennifer Ellingston and Mike Livingston, Tom Smith, Scott McLarty. Please help us get statehood. Call those folks on the Hill. Call them while they're home. You pay them. And tell everyone that we will keep our candidate true to the core, and he's done a pretty good job of doing that himself for the past 40 years. Thank you.
Hello there. We have to make health care reform an issue in this campaign because no one else is going to do it. To the Republicrats, they've defined health care reform as the difference between two patient protection acts. Now, a lot of people have very legitimate concerns that their HMO would rather see them dead than pay money that comes out of the pockets of their stockholders. And that's a serious concern. But the people who I see every day in New Mexico are not going to be helped by a Patient Protection Act because they're not patients. To be a patient, you have to have health insurance. And these folks, unless they're hit by a bus and carried in by an ambulance, are never going to get medical care. They're part of the 44 million uninsured. I assure you that health insurance is not a luxury or a convenience. It's a matter of life and death. Okay. People who are uninsured are 2.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with advanced malignant melanoma than people who have health insurance. People who are uninsured are 1.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with advanced breast cancer or advanced prostate cancer than people with health insurance. For these people, this political system has issued a death warrant, just as much of a death warrant as those who have a warrant signed by the execution-happy Bush brothers. This is a national scandal. That's why I'm proud to be a Green. That's why the Green Party is unequivocal and uncompromising in supporting universal health care access. Okay. Dr. Sidney Wolfe is an internist. He's an adjunct professor of internal medicine and 29 years ago, with Ralph Nader, he started the Public Citizens Health Research Group. This group has been fighting the good fight for many years. Today, 60% of their time is spent monitoring the pharmaceutical industry via the FDA. They work in occupational health, and they work on the problems in our healthcare system. Dozens of dangerous medications have been banned through the work of Dr. Wolfe and his organization. Recently, they exposed unethical medical experiments that we taxpayers have been paying for in Asia and Africa. Dr. Wolfe has been an inspiration for a whole generation of political activists among physicians, public health workers, and citizen activists. And it's a great honor to introduce him, and please give him a big welcome.
Thank you. It is very nice to be here. And as I was flying out here, I thought this is the first time I have ever been asked to give a talk at a national political convention. And then I thought that if I had been asked before by the one-party system, the Democrats and Republicans, I probably would have said no. So it is really an honor and a privilege for me to be asked to be here. I'm going to talk really about two things. One, the healthcare system itself, and then the pharmaceutical industry and some serious problems with them. While in Vermont recently, my old friend, since we're both in our 60s now, Ralph Nader, tossed off another one of his brilliant, thoughtful remarks, the kind of remarks that you don't ever hear from either of the other candidates. It was in Montana, a state that's been devastated by lots of outsiders coming in and ripping them off. It was, quote, "You can build an economy without turning your state into a quarry for extractive industries controlled by absentee corporations." The comment really applies equally to the healthcare system, as it's become. 2/3 of the HMOs, as you know, are for-profit. More and more hospitals, nursing homes, and so forth are for-profit as well. At $1.2 trillion, an almost unimaginable amount of money, the healthcare system is by far the largest part of our economy in this country, and it's the largest employer as well. And it's become a quarry for extractive industries controlled by somewhere else, stockholders, CEOs, to take as much money out as they can. And the more money they take out, the worse it gets, because in direct proportion to the intrusion of for-profit delivery, the number of people who are uninsured has gone up. I'd like to change gears very, very slightly and follow this whole theme and ask a question, a sort of rhetorical question, which is, what do Nobel Prize winning economists Milton Friedman and St. Matthew have in common? They're both, well, no, only one of them is dead. They're both, well, that's true. Their strong philosophical views help to explain the lose-lose situation, not fast enough, in which investor-owned HMOs now find themselves. In 1962, Friedman, in a book called Capitalism and Freedom, this is Milton Friedman, said, quote, "Few trends could so thoroughly undermine the very foundations of our free society as the acceptance by corporate officials of a social responsibility other than to make as much money for their stockholders as possible." Matthew, much earlier than that, had said, quote, "No man can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon." The primary purpose of the healthcare system is supposed to be delivering services, whereas the primary responsibility legally of for-profit HMOs or other entities is their fiduciary duty to the stockholders and CEOs. These are impossible conflicts. They cannot ever be resolved, and there's no country in the world that has any resemblance of for-profit medicine like ours. It's a fringe item practically everywhere else. One recent example illustrates this. In addition to the over 1 million Medicare patients who've essentially been dumped from Medicare HMOs because these patients weren't profitable enough. Literally, they just stopped the whole plans. It's not one-on-one. They just closed down the Medicare HMO because these people are doing the awful thing of getting sick. And that doesn't work out too well because the government is paying these for-profit HMOs and they're not supposed to have to pay money out for people who are sick. So they just closed the plans down. But it's now spread to non-Medicare sector, and there is an East Coast HMO, Trigon, that just recently notified 100,000 younger people, not Medicare, that they had to get another insurer because in 6 months they were not going to have any insurance. Although this is bad news for these 100,000 people, it was very good news on Wall Street because the observers of this company thought that this was a very clever move to dump these unprofitable patients. And within days of the announcement that this was happening, the stock value of this company went up 23% in a matter of 3 or 4 days. And this again shows you the irreconcilable conflict between making money for stockholders and giving medical care. In addition to happening at a macro level, just saying we're closing down, dumping happens at a micro level as well. What does this mean? We've put out a series of reports, the next one in about 3 or 4 months, naming the names of now 700 or 800 hospitals in this country who have violated federal law and dumped patients who show up in their emergency room, usually uninsured, with acute medical problems. The federal law says you can't do that. You have to diagnose them, stabilize them, treat them. You can't just send them away. In the last few years, we've actually gotten the profiles on these patients. Listen to this one. A mother with a 3.5-year-old daughter brings her to the emergency room and tells the people in the emergency room, my daughter has had 103.5 temperature, has been vomiting, and is complaining of a headache for several days. This means probably a blood infection, meningitis, something like this. But the people in the emergency room, because this person's uninsured, tell the mother, we're not going to see you. We're going to make an appointment for tomorrow morning so you go see another doctor. In the middle of the night, the child gets worse. The mother returns to the emergency room, but by then the child is dead. This violates federal law, and it doesn't happen, again, in any other developed country because there's no such thing as showing up in the emergency room without any insurance because everyone in these countries have insurance. Another example. Rather than face federal penalties, much smaller than they should be, for dumping patients, a for-profit hospital in Texas, right near the border of Texas and Mexico, adopted another challenge, another way of addressing this problem. The MIGRA, or the Immigration Naturalization Service, is feared by lots of people who have just come across into this country, even though they are here illegally, because they've heard stories of manhandling or mishandling people by the Immigration Naturalization Service. So what this hospital did was buy uniforms for its guards that looked exactly like the uniforms of the INS. The hospital claimed that this was just an accident, although in every respect it looked exactly like it. And the man who sold the uniforms to the hospital said the hospital's request was, quote, very specific. They wanted a uniform that looked like the Border Patrol. What this succeeded in doing is scaring lots of people away from the hospital, both in terms of their own getting medical care and also in terms of even visiting patients in the hospital. Eventually, this hospital was caught with dumping patients as well, but this is an example of dumping at the smaller level as opposed to the hundreds of thousands of people. We did a study with my colleagues Steffi Woolhandler and David Himmelstein. We published it last year in the Journal of American Medical Association, and we looked at all the data on 329 HMOs in this country. And the question we're asking is, what is the quality of medical care like in the not-for-profit HMOs versus the for-profit HMOs? And there were 16 different measures of quality, and for all 16 measures of quality, The quality of medical care was much better in the not-for-profit HMOs than the for-profit. In 15 of the 16, it was statistically significant. Similar studies like that have been done on hospitals, nursing homes, and so forth, so that there's little question that when you've got this torn allegiance between the stockholders and the patients, the stockholders usually win and the patients suffer. I'd like to just close this little portion of what I have to say with a quote from, again, my colleagues David Himmelstein and Steffi Woolhandler, who are professors at Harvard, who have done much of the work showing how much money this country is wasting by not having a system like most of the rest of the world. It's hard, if you identify with patients instead of stockholders, to disagree with what Steffi and David said. Quote, this is an essay they published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The most serious objection to investor-owned care is that it embodies a new value system that severs the communal roots and Samaritan traditions of hospitals, makes doctors and nurses the instruments of investors, and views patients as commodities. In our society, some aspects of life are off limits to commerce. We prohibit the selling of children and the buying of wives, juries, and kidneys. Healthcare is too precious, intimate, and corruptible to entrust to the market. Before getting into a short discussion about the pharmaceutical industry, I'd just like to say one thing in terms of what do we do about this. Instead of dumping patients at the large level, at the small level, why don't we just dump the whole health insurance industry? And while we're at it, why don't we dump all the for-profit delivers of medical care, whether it's nursing homes or hospitals or HMOs. You will have the privilege of hearing an old friend and colleague, Tony Mazzocchi, tomorrow of the Labor Party, who will discuss what we used to call and financially still view as a single-payer system, really the only remedy, which is now also called just health care. And just health care means just health care. It means we don't need all these people with the green shades stealing money from us, going in there, feeding it to stockholders. We want just health care. I just want to talk a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry. One of the first things that led me to leave my comfortable career as a clinician taking care of patients and as an investigator at the National Institutes of Health had to do with the pharmaceutical industry. And it was almost 30 years ago. It was in March of 1971. I got a call one day from a physician friend who said, do you know that half of the intravenous fluids in the United States are contaminated? I said, I knew that, but I thought they were going to recall them all. And he said, no, somehow or other, they're not. At the time that he called me, there were 150 people reported to have blood infections from these contaminated IV fluids and 9 reported deaths. Eventually, there were dozens and dozens of deaths. The kind of bacteria was extremely unusual, so that any hospital that saw it had never seen it before, and as soon as they were clever enough to stop using Abbott IV fluids, they stopped having the infections. But somehow the company conned the Food and Drug Administration into thinking that there would be a shortage of intravenous fluids if there was a recall. And so a joint statement was issued, and it's at this point that I was brought into it. It said, keep using these infected intravenous fluids, but, quote, at the first suspicion of septicemia, blood infection, or fever, which might be associated with contaminated IV fluid, all existent IV apparatus should be removed, unquote. When I was told this, I said, I can't believe that anyone would do this. It was a joint statement issued by the company, Abbott Laboratories, and its friend, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. I called Ralph and I said, what can we do about this? Can we try and supersede this bad decision-making by the government and its partner in industry? And he said, why don't you just review all the research on this? There were some published reports, and let's demand that they take them off the market. And on one fateful day, we sent a letter to the FDA demanding that they immediately take these things off the market, and that evening went on all 3 television networks, and the next day articles were in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they were recalled 48 hours later. What this told me was there was a lot of work to do. I was still at the National Institutes of Health at this time, and this event precipitating my leaving and starting the Health Research Group 29 years ago. I just want to spend a few minutes describing some of the greed and devastating decision-making done by the government and the pharmaceutical industry, which are in closer links than they have ever been before. The first, as alluded to earlier, is the failure to do ethical tests. A couple years ago, we published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine criticizing the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control because they were funding studies in Africa where HIV-positive pregnant women were being given a placebo instead of AZT to prevent their babies from getting infected. This was after it was clearly known that AZT, if given to the mothers, would prevent 2/3 of the babies from getting infected. We objected to this. Eventually, these studies were stopped, but this told us that it's not just the industry, but even the government that has views that are really unacceptable. One of the things that is horrible about globalization that we all oppose in the form that it's going is the globalization of human experimentation. What do I mean? In the last few years, there's been a really catastrophic growth of the amount of drug experiments funded by U.S. companies that are being done elsewhere, as in other countries. It's gone from about 900 doctors out of this country doing drug experiments for the drug industry just about 8 or 9 years ago to 5,380 in the last couple of years, a 5-fold increase. Why do they do it? Just like labor, it's cheaper in other countries. Just like labor, they don't have ethical standards, even as good as the ones here, which are questionable sometimes. I'll read you from an ad by what we call the largest HEC in the world. HEC is a phrase that we have used to describe human experimentation corporations. These are for-profit companies who are doing work for drug companies to more quickly, around the clock, depending what country they're in, test drugs. This is an ad taken out by Quintiles. It's based in North Carolina. It is the largest human experimentation corporation in the world, and it's an ad in a magazine read by the drug industry. They have offices in 60 countries around the world, and they promise in their ad to the drug industry that they can, quote, even help you tap the vast drug-naive patient populations of China, Korea, and other emerging markets, unquote. This is what's going on now in this growth industry of human experimentation. Other problems are criminal activity by the pharmaceutical industry. We have initiated successful criminal prosecution of a couple, one pending now, pharmaceutical companies who decided they didn't want to tell the FDA about deaths and injuries that had happened with drugs because the FDA might not approve the drugs if they found out about it. And all of these drugs and one medical device, a heart valve that's now killed 1,000 people because the company didn't tell the FDA it was dangerous, are off the market, but too late for literally thousands of people who've been hospitalized or killed. The companies didn't go to jail because that's not the kind of thing you do to white-collar criminals. They got fined relatively small amounts of money. A green government would put them in jail. Aside from not reporting things that would have saved thousands of lives, another problem is recently the FDA, through a combination of a Republican Congress that does almost no oversight, even worse than the Democratic Congress did, and an administration that has no guts. We have the worst FDA now that we've had in 29 years. Worse than the Reagan FDA, worse than the Nixon FDA, worse than the Bush FDA, and the brief Ford FDA. A record number of drugs, the largest number of drugs ever approved in 2 years in this country, was approved in 1996 and 1997. Already, just in the few years since then, 6 of them have been taken off the market, and 1 has all but been taken off the market. That's the largest number of drugs ever banned from a 2-year period of drug approvals. And in all the cases, except 1, the FDA knew before the drugs came on the market that they were dangerous, and instead of banning them, they went with the industry's wish to get them approved. One group of workers that we are very concerned about are the physician workers at the Food and Drug Administration, who went there because they believe that they have an important public health function to protect the public. After seeing drug after drug that shouldn't have been approved, get approved, kill people, and then being taken off the market, we did a study of the doctors at the FDA. And this is what they told us. This is data from 53 different physicians at the FDA. They told us that 27 drugs that they said were too dangerous to come on the market had been approved over their objection. They told us that 25 drugs that they had reviewed had been approved too quickly. And they told us that they had been silenced, not allowed to speak up at public advisory committee meetings because it might prejudice the advisory committee against approving a drug. In the first 25 years of the group that Ralph and I started, we never, despite all the problems the FDA had, what I'm about to describe to you has happened in the last 3 years. 5 physicians and 2 PhDs have called us up saying, I want to leave the FDA, they're overturning my decisions, I'd like to come and work for you. We can't afford to hire them at their salaries, although we did hire one, a brilliant woman who had been at the FDA for 13 years as a pharmacologist, toxicologist. She was in the division that approved Redux, that approved the now defunct drug for diabetes, Resolin. She is working with us, and she's an extraordinary worker, and she tells me, you're complimenting me for the things I used to get criticized for at the Food and Drug Administration. One last symptom of how bad the problem is that the industry, the pharmaceutical industry and the medical device industry have an unprecedented warm feeling about the FDA these days. They have never liked the FDA more than they do now, and if that doesn't worry you, nothing will. I'd just like to close with a couple other things, since my time is running out as well. In addition to the FDA being the worst FDA that has ever been, the same is true over at OSHA in the occupational health area. We did a study of enforcement activities at OSHA in the last few years, and they're either as bad or worse than any administration since OSHA came into existence, which is 1971. A couple examples. The number of OSHA inspections has been steadily declining since a peak in 1975. During every year of the Clinton administration, it's changed a little bit the last year, but not much. But during every other year of the Clinton administration, the number of inspections has been lower than in any year during any prior administration since the act was put into place. Also, a decrease in the number of serious, willful, and repeat violations, which is what the industry needs more of to take seriously what OSHA is trying to do. Right now, there's an unprecedented amount of demoralization amongst government employees because they aren't being allowed to do what they said. I sent a letter to Dr. Shalala, the Secretary of HHS, because they were vamping on some doctors at the FDA who were saying these drugs should be taken off the market. And I reminded her, and I asked her to remind everyone in the government, not only the HHS, of the code of ethics. Any person in government service should put loyalty to the highest moral principles and to country above loyalty to person's party or government department. I would look forward to the day when I or a lot of other people who would be in government but for having to check your conscience at the door would be able to go back into government because the leaders of the government would support rather than rebut the kinds of efforts that these very dignified and conscientious public servants have tried to make. Next week, if all goes according to schedule, about 8 or 9 days from now, I will become a grandparent for the first time. And not that I don't think about the future anyway, but this makes me think a further generation into the future. And I think these are really historic days. I think we have here, and it's really up to you and to us, the first sustainable progressive party in the history of the United States. And closing on the theme of your party, I think that it is important to say, contrary to the movies of the same title, green is not just the color of money, it's the color of the future. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here in Adelphia for our coverage of the Green Party convention in Denver. Remember, it's an election year. Get out and vote.